Welcome to The Debate. When you look down at a sprawling city's traffic grid from a helicopter, there is this illusion of a constant natural flow.
Mm-hmm.
Cars are moving, stopping, turning, accelerating. It all seems like an organic rhythm.
Right. But that flow is entirely artificial. I mean, it is being dictated down to the millisecond by the traffic lights.
Exactly. The lights create the necessary tension. They hold the cars back, let the pressure build to an absolute maximum, and then, on a rigid periodic schedule, they flush the system green.
Or, you build a roundabout. No rigid stopping, no jarring red lights. You just have dynamic, continuous flow, letting the system govern itself based on the immediate velocity of the cars themselves.
And that mechanical tension between the red light and the roundabout is exactly what we are analyzing today. But instead of cars on a grid, we are talking about cards in your hand. Today, we are exploring the mechanical architecture and strategic philosophy of hand size limits and discard phases in tabletop game design.
Yeah, because if you have ever played a card game, you know the feeling of drawing too many cards and being told you have to throw some away.
Right. And how and when a game forces a player to do that fundamentally dictates the game's economy, its pacing, and, well, its strategic depth.
Hand limits really are the invisible scaffolding of game design. You rarely think about them until they restrict you, but they are holding the entire system together. The central question we are exploring today is this: do rigid, periodic end-of-turn cleanup phases, like the ones famously used in Magic, The Gathering, and Yu-Gi-Oh!, create superior strategic depth? Or, on the flip side, do dynamic alternative hand limit systems, like those found in Arc Nova, Pandemic, or Dominion, provide better game flow and mechanical elegance?
Exactly.
I will be defending the traditional, periodic end-of-turn cleanup phase as the absolute pinnacle of strategic design. I believe it allows for temporary mid-term expansion, letting players weave complex, highly rewarding stack interactions that simply aren't possible in other systems. And I will be championing alternative, dynamic systems. I argue that non-periodic breaks, immediate real-time enforcement, or total deck clearing are vastly superior because they prevent administrative bloat, they tie resource management directly to the game's pacing, and crucially, they eliminate convoluted rules loopholes.
Well, I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective right out of the gate. The periodic end-of-turn limit, specifically the 7-card limit in Magic the Gathering or the 6-card limit in Yu-Gi-Oh!, is brilliant precisely because of when it happens.
Okay, how so?
It allows a player to temporarily exceed the limit during their main phases. You can draw 20 cards, hold them all in your hand, analyze your options, and sequence a massive high-utility turn where a master plan unfolds. The games gives you the freedom to expand your resources to an absurd degree and only demands a strict, structured administrative contraction at the very end of your turn.
Right.
It creates a beautiful, breathing rhythm of limitless potential followed by necessary curation.
I come at it from a different way. That rigid end-step enforcement inevitably leads to rules nightmares and recursive loops that just bog down the player experience. Systems like Arc Nova, which uses a dynamic, player-triggered break phase to enforce its 3 to 5 card limit, or Dominion, which uses a total deck clearing cycle every single turn, are fundamentally superior.
Superior in what way, though?
Because they integrate hand limits seamlessly into the game's actual velocity, rather than treating them as an isolated, easily exploitable administrative chore.
Let's focus on that philosophy of timing, because that is where the divergence between these two design schools really begins. You might be listening to this thinking, well, why have hand limits at all?
Right, because without them, players would just hoard cards forever, completely breaking the game's economy.
Exactly. So the debate is fundamentally about when we enforce that restriction. In Magic, the limit is checked only during the cleanup step, which is the very last fraction of a turn. If I have a card draw engine going on my turn, I can draw 100 cards. I can hold them.
Yep.
I can cast spells, weigh my options, construct a perfect tactical sequence. The game does not stop me. It says, go ahead, be creative, but you have to pay the piper before you pass the turn.
But see, that freedom creates a massive disconnect between the game's economy and its actual moment-to-moment tension. Contrast that pay-the-piper-later mentality with a cooperative game like Pandemic.
Okay, let's look at Pandemic.
In Pandemic, the 7-card limit features immediate real-time enforcement. The moment a player draws that 8th card, the game instantly pauses. You cannot take another action. You cannot wait until the end of your turn. You must discard, or you must immediately play an event card to get back down to 7.
Which feels incredibly restrictive when you're sitting at the table. It is like having a micromanager hovering over your shoulder.
I wouldn't say that.
Now, think about it. Imagine you are working on a complex project at your office, and every time you put an 8th piece of paper on your desk, your boss runs in and screams, "File that immediately."
Okay, that's a bit dramatic.
Magic System is like a nightly audit. It allows the business to run freely and creatively during the day, letting you shuffle papers around however you need to solve the problem, and you only sort the books at closing time.
In a cooperative puzzle like Pandemic, that micromanager is absolutely essential to preserve the game's tension and solve one of the biggest problems in tabletop gaming, which is the alpha gamer.
Ah, right. The player who wants to run everyone's turn.
Exactly. If Pandemic used your nightly audit system, players could just endlessly share and hoard resources during a turn until they had a mathematically guaranteed win. The game would lose all its friction. Look specifically at the expansion rule regarding the Archivist character.
The one who grabs cards from the discard pile?
Yes, the Archivist can retrieve cards from the discard pile. If players were allowed to just voluntarily discard cards whenever they wanted, the discard pile would just become a massive open inventory for the Archivist to pull from.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that would be broken.
The designers foresaw this. Players are strictly prohibited from voluntarily discarding cards just to feed the Archivist. They can only discard when forced by that immediate hand limit. The real-time enforcement is what makes the Archivist a balanced, functional role rather than a game-breaking exploit.
I will concede that. For a cooperative puzzle, forcing players to make painful choices in real time adds a necessary layer of friction. But in competitive, high-complexity systems, pushing that friction to the end of the turn creates a space for mechanical mastery that your dynamic system simply cannot match.
Mechanical mastery?
Yes. You call isolated cleanup phases an administrative chore. I see them as a canvas for deep interaction. I want to break down the Magic the Gathering cleanup step, because to a Spike, a highly competitive player, it is an architectural marvel.
Architectural marvel is certainly one phrase for a phase that requires a flow chart to understand.
Let's walk the listener through it slowly, because the causality here is fascinating. The cleanup step happens after the end step. Most casual players think the end step is the end of the turn, but it isn't. The cleanup step is the true ending.
Right.
3 things happen simultaneously without using the stack, meaning players cannot respond to them. First, you discard down to your maximum hand size. Second, all until end of turn effects wear off. And third, all marked damage is removed from permanence.
Let's be precise here, because precision matters in these systems. Damage is removed from creatures. It's not removed from planeswalkers or battles.
That is a vital distinction, yes. Planeswalkers lose loyalty counters, and battles lose defense counters when they take damage. It is not marked damage in the rules sense, so the cleanup step doesn't heal them. They are permanently diminished.
Exactly. But here is where the brilliance of the rules architecture shines. Rule 514.3a. Normally, no player gets priority during the cleanup step. You can't cast spells. But designers realized they had a paradox on their hands. What happens if a player discards a card that triggers an effect?
Right, because then things get messy.
If the game just moves to the next turn, the rules of reality in the game break. So Rule 514.3a says if a state-based action occurs or a trigger happens because of your discard, players suddenly get priority. I have to stop you right there, because framing this as brilliance ignores the reality of playing it at the table. This is where the nightmare begins.
It is a feature of high-level play. Let's say you have to discard Fiery Temper, a card with the Madness mechanic. The act of discarding it to your hand size triggers Madness, putting it on the stack. Because a trigger was placed on the stack, Rule 514.3a kicks in to prevent a paradox. All players get priority.
Right, the game just reopens.
You can cast Instance. Your opponent can counter it. And once the stack is finally empty, the game doesn't just pass the turn, it generates a brand new, entirely fresh cleanup step. It creates this beautiful recursive loop.
Okay, but
Imagine you have a creature called the Gitrog monster on the field, which says whenever a land goes to your graveyard, you draw a card. You have 8 cards in hand. You discard a land for your hand size. Gitrog triggers. The game grants priority, you draw a card, and suddenly you are back up to 8 cards. You resolve the trigger, the stack empties, a new cleanup step starts, and you have to discard again.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that this is good design. Let me tell you why. You were describing a phase designed specifically and explicitly to clean up the game state. Its entire mechanical purpose is contraction.
Yes.
Instead, the rules are being hijacked to initiate entirely new chains of actions. The burden on the players to understand that a phase meant to end the turn can suddenly become the most complex part of the turn is just massive administrative bloat. If you want to see the terminal illness of this design philosophy, you don't even have to look at edge cases in Magic. Look at Yu-Gi-Oh!
Well, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is certainly extreme in its pacing, but it operates on a similar periodic enforcement.
It operates on the same logic, and it breaks entirely because of it. In Yu-Gi-Oh!, the hand limit of 6 is enforced at the end phase, but if you discard a card with a graveyard trigger, like Dandelion, which summons tokens when it hits the graveyard, or the White Stone of Legend, which searches your deck for a dragon, you initiate convoluted chains during the exact phase meant to shut the turn down.
Right, the end phase becomes a second main phase.
Exactly! Or take Dark World Grimoire, a continuous spell that triggers whenever you discard. The most notorious historical example of this breaking the game's economy is the Super Rejuvenation ruling.
Ah, the infamous dragon discard engine.
For those who haven't had the displeasure of playing against it, Super Rejuvenation is a quick play spell that lets you draw a card during the end phase for every dragon you discarded that turn. Notice how this interacts with the end phase.
Oh, I know where this is going.
A player finishes their main turn and gets to the end phase with 10 cards in hand. The rules state they must discard down to 6, so they discard 4 dragons. This triggers Super Rejuvenation, which then allows them to draw 4 new cards. They ultimately pass their turn to their opponent with 10 cards in hand after the discard phase.
It's an incredible synergy.
But it entirely defeats the mechanical purpose of a hand limit. The rulebook explicitly says the limit is 6. But the periodic architecture allows a player to comfortably hoard double that amount while disguised as cleanup.
But what that actually does is reward systemic knowledge. The player who understands that the end phase is not a hard stop, but rather a sequence of priority checks can leverage it to their advantage. It creates a skill gap.
The problem is that the vast majority of players don't understand it, because it is entirely counterintuitive. Half the player base fundamentally misunderstands how turn-ending cards even interact with this step. Look at the card Sundial of the Infinite in Magic.
Oh, sure.
The text simply reads, "End the turn." Players constantly think that means they can just activate it and bypass their cleanup step entirely, allowing them to dodge their discard limit or keep their until end of turn borrowed creatures forever.
I will confess, when I first started playing, I was one of those players. I thought I had discovered this genius loophole to cheat the hand size limit. I thought I could just hit the sundial and say, my turn is over, I keep all 10 cards.
Because that is what the English language implies. But the underlying mechanical architecture says otherwise. Sundial doesn't skip the cleanup step, it jumps straight to it. It forces the discard anyway. It clears the damage. The fact that an entire subculture of judges and rules lawyers is required to explain to players how the end of a turn actually works proves that the periodic cleanup phase is bloated. It is a failure of intuitive design.
It is complex, absolutely. But I would argue that complexity is the price of a high strategic ceiling. Still, I will acknowledge that for a certain type of game, especially modern games that prioritize flow over deep stack interactions, that level of granular management is undesirable.
Exactly.
So let's pivot and look at your proposed antidote. How do dynamic pacing systems enforce hand limits without losing that strategic depth?
They solve it by recognizing that hand management shouldn't be an isolated phase that you can exploit. It should be intrinsically tied to the velocity of the game itself. Let's look at modern Eurogame design, specifically the massively popular board game Ark Nova.
Okay.
In Arc Nova, you have a hand limit. By default, it's only 3 cards, which is incredibly tight, though you can upgrade it to 5 with a university token. But the enforcement isn't periodic. You don't check your hand size at the end of your turn.
It relies entirely on the break track.
Exactly. Discarding is tied to a dynamic, player-driven pacing mechanic. Whenever a player takes certain actions, like the sponsor's action, they advance a break token along a communal track. When that token hits the end of the track, the game pauses for a break. That is the only time you enforce the hand limit.
Right.
And it's bundled seamlessly with other administrative resets that affect everyone, like token removal, association board resets, and income generation.
I have to challenge the elegance of this, because I have always found Arc Nova's break track incredibly frustrating.
Really? Why?
If I am holding 8 cards, meticulously planning a massive multi-turn combo, and my opponent takes a mundane sponsor's action that pushes the break token over the edge, I am suddenly forced to throw away 5 cards. It feels like I am being penalized for their action.
Well, that's the point.
But my hand limit is at the mercy of my opponent's turn. Where is the strategic elegance in having no control over your own cleanup phase?
The elegance is in the psychological warfare. That feeling of frustration you just described, that is weaponized pacing. You can choose to hold those 8 cards for multiple turns, planning a massive combo, but you are constantly monitoring the break track. It forces you to play with your head up.
So you can't just tunnel vision on your own board.
Exactly. If your opponent sees you hoarding cards, they will intentionally take suboptimal actions just to accelerate the break, forcing you to discard your engine before you can actually play it. It takes the burden of managing the hand limit away from rigid rules loopholes like we saw in Yu-Gi-Oh! And places it squarely in the realm of player interaction. It's the roundabout from our traffic metaphor. The players dictate the flow and the stops based on their collective velocity.
I do appreciate how Arc Nova turns the discard phase into a high-stakes game of chicken. It's highly interactive, even if it induces anxiety. But let's look at your other example, because this one I have serious reservations about. Dominion.
The granddaddy of all deck builders.
Indeed. In Dominion, you draw a starting hand of 5 cards. And at the end of your turn, regardless of what you played or didn't play, you must discard your entire hand. It is a total deck clearing cycle. There is no hand limit because there is no hand retention.
Yes, and it is a masterpiece of economic regulation. By forcing players to discard their entire hand at the end of every turn, the game fundamentally prevents combo hoarding.
Sure.
You can't just sit there holding 3 powerful action cards, waiting for your engine pieces to miraculously align in a single turn. You either play the cards you drew now, or they go in the trash. It also perfectly balances the early game economy. Think about it. If players could hold cards across turns in Dominion, they would just hoard their starting copper treasures for 2 turns, combine them, and buy a high-value province immediately.
Yeah, the game would be over in minutes.
Exactly. Total deck clearing stops that cold. It forces engine velocity. If you want a massive turn, you have to physically build a deck that draws into it dynamically in a single turn.
But at what cost to the player's agency? By forcing a total discard, doesn't Dominion completely rip the soul out of card games?
Rip the soul out?
Yes. The essence of a card game is the secret, hidden potential of what you're holding back. If I can't hold on to a card, I can't look at the board state, anticipate my opponent's move 2 turns from now, and hold a specific countermeasure in reserve. It completely removes the concept of long-term strategic curation of your hand.
I wouldn't go that far.
It reduces the game to mere tactical reacting. You are completely at the mercy of whatever 5 cards you happen to draw that turn. You aren't managing a hand, you're just pulling a slot machine lever, looking at the payout, and doing your best with what the dealer gave you.
I wouldn't call it a slot machine because you are the one who built the machine. That is where the strategic depth lies. In a game like Magic, the depth is in how you tactically play the specific cards in your hand and when you choose to deploy them.
Right.
In Dominion, the depth is in how you statistically engineer your deck to ensure those 5 randomly drawn cards are exactly what you need them to be. The total discard is the crank of the engine. By maximizing deck throughput, forcing you to discard and draw 5 completely new cards every single turn, the game provides immediate, tangible feedback on your deck-building decisions.
That's true, you do cycle faster.
You see the cards you purchased much faster. It's clean, it's incredibly elegant, and it completely eliminates the need for a 5-page rules document explaining what happens when 2 triggers fire simultaneously during a cleanup step.
It is undeniably clean. But to me, it sacrifices that palpable tension. When I pass the turn in Magic with 3 cards in hand and 2 mana available, the tension across the table is thick. My opponent doesn't know what I kept. Did I keep a counterspell? Do I have a removal piece? Am I bluffing?
Sure, the bluffing aspect is strong.
That psychological warfare exists precisely because the game allows me to curate my hand at the end of my turn, rather than just wiping the slate clean and absolving me of those choices.
But that psychological warfare still exists in dynamic systems. It has just been relocated. In Arc Nova, when I see you holding 6 cards and the break token is 2 spaces away, I am engaging in that exact same warfare. I am calculating whether you are desperate enough to spend an inefficient turn just to play a card before the break forces you to discard it. The tension hasn't disappeared, it has just been relocated from the rulebook's footnotes and the hidden information in your hand directly onto the macro board state where everyone can interact with it.
Relocated indeed. And I think that beautifully summarizes where our positions settle today. I maintain that structured, periodic, and steps, especially those with deep priority checks like Magic's Rule 514.3a, offer unmatched strategic ceilings. The ability to push the boundaries of a turn, generating recursive loops and highly complex deck interactions during the cleanup step, rewards deep systemic mastery. It gives the player agency to curate their perfect arsenal.
And I will reiterate that tying hand limits to game velocity creates a fundamentally cleaner, more engaging player experience. Whether it's through Arc Nova's dynamic, player-driven breaks that weaponize pacing, or Dominion's engine-accelerating total clears, these systems prevent administrative bloat. They eliminate the convoluted rules loopholes that plague rigid end steps and keep the players focused on the game itself rather than the rulebook.
Despite our divergence on the how, I think we both clearly converge on the why. Hand limits truly are the unsung heroes of tabletop design. They are the invisible regulators of game economy, the ultimate safeguard against infinite combo hoarding, and the primary mechanism for pacing a player's strategic expansion.
Absolutely. We may disagree on whether the burden of managing those limits should fall on a rigid administrative phase or a dynamic game mechanic. But without them, the architecture of these games would completely collapse under their own weight. There would be no tension, no difficult choices, and ultimately, no game.
Understanding these mechanics really changes how you view the cardboard in your hands. The next time you are playing a game, pay close attention to exactly when the rules force you to let go of your cards. Look at how digital adaptations handle these intricate cleanup steps, automating the priority passes and recursive loops we've spent the last 20 minutes dissecting.
And ask yourself if that rule is serving the flow of the game or if the game is just serving the rule.
Well said. Just like that city traffic grid we started with, sometimes you need the rigid, structured tension of a red light to keep things from crashing. And sometimes you just need to let the roundabout do its job and keep the traffic flowing. We'll leave it to you, the listener, to decide which design philosophy you prefer navigating. Thank you for joining us, and until next time, keep your hand size in check.